I've never done this before, but I'm going to kick this review off by reading to you my social reaction to Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. It's the kind of tweet that you're allowed to send out after you've seen the movie, you're fresh out of seeing the movie, usually prior to the actual review embargo opening up. The studio lets you tweet out something. I now know what it was like to see Snow White in 1937. Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse is a revelation. One of the greatest ever achievements of American animation. A work of art and artistic genius. An insane, groundbreaking feat of cinema. Sony Animation has taken the crown. After reuniting with Gwen Stacy, Miles Morales, Brooklyn's full-time friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, is catapulted across the multiverse, where he encounters the Spider Society, a team of spider people charged with protecting the multiverse's very existence. Miles soon comes to learn that anyone can wear the mask, it's how you wear it that makes you a hero. Okay, I know a lot of people don't take like huge credence out of those early reactions that come out of early movie screenings and stuff like that. They have a tendency to be hyperbolic and kind of over the top. This is the greatest comic book movie since the last comic book movie. I try my best not to do that. I try my best to be an honest film critic and just put out my thoughts as they are, whether I really love something or really don't like something. And I don't try to go with the current, and I also don't try to go against the grain. I'm just someone who wants to give my honest opinion here. Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse is, as I said, one of the greatest artistic achievements that's ever been put on the screen. Not only in American animation, but in cinema. I can't believe I'm about to say this phrase because it's something that I never thought I would say, but it is. This film is a work of art. I said at the top that I now know what it was like to see Snow White in 1937. What I mean here is that Snow White was such a watershed moment in the industry. It was something like nothing that had ever been seen before. And there's only been a few times in my life where I have seen something and thought, wow, that's completely unlike anything ever. These are moments that go back to my childhood. When I first saw The Wizard of Oz for the first time, which is my favorite movie of all time. When I first saw Star Wars for the first time. When I first saw Toy Story. These were moments that, you know, all accumulatively built up to me falling in love with cinema and wanting to work in the film space. And I feel like I've never really had that moment since I was a kid. Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse is quite literally like nothing we have ever seen before in cinema. This is another watershed moment where the industry is going to take a big hard look at it. They're going to take, other studios are going to take a big hard look at themselves and realize what they could be doing. Now, of course, this spins out of the back of 2018's Into the Spider-Verse, which in itself was a revelation. It utilized this art style that had never really been dabbled in before, really gorgeously artistic. But this film here just feels like another step. It's like another level. So many more layers coming to this that show the power of filmmaking and art on the big screen. I don't think a movie has shown as much artistic brilliance, artistic extravagance, artistic experimentation, particularly in American cinema, American animation, since Walt Disney's Fantasia in 1940. And you all know that I don't say that lightly because Fantasia is one of, if not, my favorite animated film of all time. A work of genius, a work of art, it's a masterpiece. But I see a lot of Fantasia in Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, in the way that it handles its art. The first movie did this to an extent in that, you know, each character sort of has its own artistic style. Their world has a very different kind of artistic style. You know, especially when you compare like Miles Morales' as kind of bright and bustling Manhattan 21st century world to the kind of early 20th turn of the century world of Spider-Man Noir, the black and white, dreary sort of kind of graphic novel-y kind of inspired sort of thing. You know, you have those kind of vast differences there. But this movie here introduces so many different characters that the art style is changing rapidly. And in the same way that Fantasia used its artwork to tell different stories in different art styles, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse does this to explore its characters and explore the worlds that they inhabit. And there are so many different art styles here at play. Some of them I'm not even going to mention because it would be a spoiler. There's some big like wow moments in this movie. Of course, there's that art style that we've come to know from the first movie, that beautiful hybrid CG cross with sort of more traditional stylings. But we also have stuff like there are individual characters that are animated differently. Like some characters are drawn as if they're out of pages of a comic book. Some characters that just have completely different frame rates to other characters. There's a villain in here that's drawn like an old Leonardo da Vinci sort of a blueprint on that kind of, you know, old brown parchment with kind of those frenetic kind of pencil lines. There's watercolors in here. Just such a beautiful mesh of art that this movie is just, in itself, is a work of art. Within the first 5 or 10 minutes, you know you're watching something special because of the way that artwork is used in the film. And particularly in the earlier scenes, we come in with some very early scenes with Gwen Stacy, and her scenes are very watercolor inspired. They use a lot of real beautiful kind of soft pastels in her world. But the way that that is used and the way that kind of watercolor style is used is so beautiful, and it's unlike anything I've ever seen. You can feel the texture. You can feel, it's almost like these paints are real. You can feel them. You can see them running. You can see the paint strokes just running down the screen. Again, I don't want to get into spoiler territory, but it's all intrinsically linked to the characters and their emotions and their story, how the artwork and how the colors kind of play off. Just the way that the art is used, you get a feeling that there was a freedom in making the movie. I'm sure that this movie was stressful as hell to pull together because there are so many different artists working in so many different styles in this, and I could just imagine the time crunch and the headaches that this whole thing would have caused them. But you can feel the freedom in the artwork. The freedom that the artist has in being able to put their pen or their brush or their Wacom tablet, whatever have you, the way that they are able to utilize their tool to tell this story and express these emotions. There's so much freedom in it and there's so much beauty in it. That's something I've rarely felt in an animated film for a very long time. This movie right here, you can feel the artists, you can feel the soul. Again, I don't want to sound so pretentious and hyperbolic, but I can't help it because this movie is just a work of beauty. This movie just made me feel things I have never felt watching an animated film, or at the very least since the first time I watched Fantasia or Toy Story or Snow White. And this is how I know that this is what audiences in 1937 felt when they watched Snow White for the first time, because it was just so different and new. And it makes you think, what else can be done with this? What could other studios be doing with this? Animation houses have fallen into this trap of being so formulaic. Sony proves you maybe don't have to do that. Or maybe this is Sony's formula. I don't know. We'll see how they go going forward. But apart from all that artistic brilliance, this movie has an incredible story. And it never lets the cosmetics and never lets that artwork get in the way of that story. This is also a very frenetic film. Incredibly rambunctious. It is fast-paced. It is brisk. There are crazy set pieces. There are, pardon my language, batshit action scenes. There's so much going, so many cylinders firing at once. It's like an explosion of everything, but it's handled so tastefully. That never gets in the way, that frenetic nature and that artistic beauty, it never gets in the way of the story or the characters. This has such a great story, and it's such a human, heartfelt story. You can definitely feel that this is part one in a two-part story, because particularly the first maybe hour and a half of this movie does a lot of setup, and you feel like you're just getting into the film when it ends, and you get that to be continued for Beyond the Spider-Verse, which is the next movie coming out, you know, next year or 2025, but I think it's out next year. You know, this is such a slow building thing, and when filmmakers can do that, they can take their time in telling their story and building their characters, you can just feel it, and it's so great. This is just such a beautiful narrative, and the writing here is just so wonderful, and the characters have been handled beautifully. This goes for 2.5 hours, just under, and I imagine the next one's probably going to go for about 2.5 hours as well. All up, this is going to be like the best part of a 5-hour story, so there's a lot of room to breathe in there for the characters and the narrative. So in this film particularly, which is the setup movie, the characters get so much time to breathe. And the character work here is impeccable. Particularly, again, for an animated film from the Western world. These movies are so short and brisk, 80 to 90 minutes usually, that you have to have this whole character cycle within like an hour and a bit. This movie, it takes its time to breathe. It lets the characters breathe and the story breathe, and the interactions with the characters and how they all relate to each other and how they all affect each other and each other's stories and each other's narratives. And it's so succinctly intertwined. And then the next level is how all of that melds in with the artwork, and how the artwork blends into the characters and into the stories, and how everything here, the writing, the artistic nature of everything just works on all cylinders and just complements each other. This is a perfect, not only animated film, not only comic book movie, but movie. This is a masterpiece of American filmmaking. Again, it's a phrase I wish I never thought I would ever use, because it sounds so hyperbolic, so pretentious. But this movie is unlike anything we've ever seen before. This is one of my like top animated movies of all time, or at least in my top 5, along with stuff like Fantasia and Snow White and Beauty and the Beast. As I said, studios are going to look at this and go, what are we doing? Look what we could be doing. Enough of this formulaic stuff. I love the Disney stuff. I love the Pixar stuff as much as the next guy or gal out there. But this shows that we could be getting so much more. Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse is one of the greatest things I've seen in the cinema for a very long time, and I don't think anything's going to match this for a long time. And I know that Sony and the writers and the directors and everyone involved in this have got big shoes to fill in the next movie. They somehow managed to top Into the Spider-Verse tantamount. I don't know how they're going to do it again with the next film, but I'm really keen to see. At that, I think it's very obvious that I'm going to be giving Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse a very big and very easy 5 out of 5. And at that, I want to know your thoughts on Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. Did you love it, or am I just working this thing up way too much? If you haven't seen it just yet, I want to know how you're feeling going into this one. As always, join the conversation with those thoughts down below.